Can Christians make bad art? If you've ever sat down with a handful of waffle fries and had a craving for some entertainment, Chick-fil-A may have you covered. And does copyright only apply to humans, or does AI need to follow those pesky laws as well? All that and more on this week's episode of Faith and Pop Culture.
Hey, well, what's up, everyone? Welcome to episode number 25 of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I am joined at the desk, as I always am, by the laugh track to my 90s sitcom, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up?
Oh, those were the days, Daniel. Those 90s sitcoms. Was it, what's the one with Tim Allen? Home Improvement?
Home Improvement.
I feel like that's a classic.
Full House.
Full House. Family Matters.
They don't make sitcoms like they used to. I don't know.
And I think that's probably for the best. I think it's okay that we don't.
Do we
still make sitcoms?
Am I still looking back with like nostalgia goggles?
Probably.
And, remembering those as being better than they were.
Probably, but I mean, there are some classics in there. So.
And I don't know. Do they still do like laugh tracks, or was that like something that was left in the 90s of like?
It must have been.
This is sort of like laugh now. Oh, everyone's laughing. I'll laugh. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Are there still like live? Like, are there still sitcoms that are like made?
They recorded like live with a live audience?
Yeah, like do they still do that?
I don't know if they do.
We'll have to look into that. We'll get back to you guys on that.
And we should discuss whether we need to implement a laugh track on this podcast.
Yeah,
I feel like sometimes some of my witty banter
people just
goes
know
without the response I'm looking for. So.
Yeah, well, I think that's I think more of a judgment on your
maybe people
your
just need
witty banter.
People just need a bit of help, the cues to know.
Yeah, when, I think that's when you've lost them. It's like if you have to tell me when to laugh,
clap, laugh.
Maybe you need a better joke.
Hey, well, I will work on that. But speaking of something that maybe needed a laugh track, so kind of one of the big things going on this week is that we have a new movie that came out last weekend, kind of a new faith-based movie. A lot of people are talking about it, The Forge, which I reviewed, and there's plenty for us to get into. I think this is a rich topic, because I think it is, again, using the movie itself to sort of talk about it, but not necessarily just only focusing on that, because I think it leads to just bigger questions about, hey, how do we evaluate art? Like as Christians, like how do we sort of navigate this? What makes it good? What makes it bad? Is there approaches that we should be, what should we look for with movies? So we'll get into that. I do want to report that I was actually looking snazzy. My wife liked it because it meant I had to take off my hat and I could actually dress up in like a blazer. But I had the opportunity to be at the premiere of The Forge, walking the red carpet.
Do you feel more famous now? Like were people trying to take your photos?
I mean, like the paparazzi was there, and kind of looking like, hey, is that who I think it is? Is that the host of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast?
It is.
Could
you move out of the way? There's a guy right behind you. I'd really like to photograph.
Mr. Kendrick Brothers, step aside. We want to interview. But it was fun. That was the first time that, again, we live over here in Georgia, so, not that I would be invited anyways, but like most of the premieres happen over in like LA, area. Yeah. But this one is in Atlanta, our own stomping grounds, and it was cool. I think if you've seen my review already and the conversation we're about to have, I wasn't crazy about this movie by any means. I was a little self-conscious walking the red carpet, knowing that I had a negative review floating out there in the internet. But it is cool, and I think I always, regardless of what I think of their product, their art, it's cool and interesting to me to hear from Christian creators. Because the Kendrick Brothers, they had like a Q&A after the screening, and like Priscilla Schreier, who's big name woman speaker, she was an actress in the movie, and she was sharing and just asking questions about the film. And I don't know, I like that kind of stuff. I think it's important.
Yeah, no, I think it's neat to go to and to see and experience.
And it just sort of reminds you too that like there's people on the other side of this. Like maybe that's helpful even as me as a reviewer of not that necessarily, I did make sure to get my review done before I went, because I didn't want to necessarily be colored by, I wanted to be honest and not, because there's things to be honest about. So enough about me looking snazzy in my blazer on the red carpet.
We'll see if you can, if you send me a photo, we can maybe add that to the...
Yeah, right here, you can see myself in my blazer. But I think The Forge, this is an interesting movie because I think it's a very, I don't know about divisive, but it's just one that,
well, there seems to be a dividing line between those who love it and those who could care less about it.
Yeah, or even, actively dislike like it. And I feel like the dividing line is about at 50 years old. Again, if you're younger or older than that and you don't fall in, that's fine. It's not a hard rule, but anecdotally, that sort of being this is sort of a movie that feels made by sort of the older generation for the older generation.
You can say boomer if you want to.
Hashtag okay boomer. But so I do think there is sort of a generational thing. But what makes these movies tricky sometimes is that like there's really no other movies in Hollywood like this. Like I think you hear people will make the comments like, well, like, hey, movies have messages all the time. Like Hollywood, they're always having these messages and agendas. Like it's fine if Christians have a movie that's very sort of message first. And it's just not the case. Like it is the case that Hollywood movies have messages and there's themes and there's stuff like sometimes even overt kind of messages that come through. What I think is different with a movie like The Forge is like, to me at least, like this isn't a movie with a message. Like this is a message that's communicated through a movie. Like this isn't just, hey, here's a story, it's, a true story or something, or telling it and it's inspirational. And we sort of want to emphasize this aspect of the character's journey and touch on these themes that I think are relevant. Like, this is very much like, as I heard directly from them, like in the Q&A, like we wanted to talk, to communicate about the importance of discipleship and sort of what that means and sort of hear these steps. And we sort of need to just sort of get a story that allows us to do that. Like, so.
Or doesn't, and tell it anyways.
Or at least attempt to do that. So very much like this is a message. This is a sermon. This is, you're going to, hey, Wednesday night church this week is going to be held in the AMC movie theater. Like that's, to me, that's what that is. And sort of where this gets interesting is like, is that okay? And like, how do you, because it's such in a way that like no other films are, like intertwined with like, you got the movie, you got the message, and they're the same thing almost. Like, the message is the movie is the message. So like, how do you approach that? Like, how do you, is it possible to like critique it and not, like, and still love Jesus? Like, can you be like pro message or what the message is, but like anti the medium, the vehicle used to communicate it is terrible, but I like the message. Like, and I've just sort of seen, even with some like the discussion with my review and stuff, is like Christians have a hard time with that. Like, like almost shock that like I didn't love this movie, even though I love a lot of faith-based movies. It's like, well, like, but it was so powerful. Like, this is the message we need. We need stories about this topic. And it's like, well, I think we do. Like, so it's just sort of this messy thing. And I think kind of the question that we can dive into this is just that I've been thinking about is this like, can well-meaning, solid Christian artists still make bad art? Like
definitely.
Well, see, I wish more people. But so, what do you think about it? Like, can you? Because like, obviously, I think this movie is well-intentioned.
I think like anybody can make bad art, So like, I think it almost doesn't matter the message behind your art, or even that, does art, even have a message? I mean, it certainly can. And so I think it really doesn't even matter, like, the religious perspective that someone's, like, coming from. Like, they can still make a really bad piece of art. And I think what's tricky, though, is with film, there's so much latitude in how you can make something and still call it a film. Like, there's not really like the film police necessarily, except maybe the critics that say like this. When do you go from propaganda to like a film? Like, where's that? And there's not really super clear. And I think that's why these things can get so messy and why people can really cling on to like, no, if you love Jesus, then you will have to like this movie. Whereas I think if like apply that to any other medium and it falls apart. Yeah, so that's what I think is more tricky with this.
That's what I've sort of been thinking about, like sort of equivalents of the ones that have come to my mind are like, think of a very like technically sloppy, very amateurish painting of Jesus hanging on the cross. like, is that painting powerful or is it not? And I feel like the how you sort of approach a movie like The Forge might depend like how you approach like, is it powerful because it's about Jesus on the cross, and like Jesus on the cross is powerful and that's a beautiful thing even if the painting itself is horrible, or is it like, no, that's a bad work of art, and like not only is it like, just not good, but like it's almost worse because it's dealing with a topic that should be treated with more excellence and reverence. Like,
Yeah.
if you're gonna do Jesus on the cross, like it should be, or like the other equivalent would be like, singing Amazing Grace, like a special music, like me singing it, and like, tone deaf, horrible voice, no one wants me singing. Like, is it powerful because the words about Amazing Grace and like God's amazing grace is
Yeah.
beautiful, and I get moved when I think about, in my own life, the amazing grace of God.
It's powerful, but not in the way.
Yeah, it definitely moves people emotionally. Or is it like, can you also be like, okay, like, God bless you, you love Jesus, but you're not the one that should be singing special music. Like, that's not, how you performed it isn't a good quality. And we can say that without necessarily criticizing, like, so you're saying you don't believe in God's amazing grace. Like, no, I do. I just don't think I should be the one on stage singing that. And I feel like we do acknowledge that in, like you said, in some of the other arts. That like, hey, you can have the message, or the topic, the subject. You can have the art, and like you almost treat those as two separate things. Like, just because not every painting in the history of Western society that has featured Jesus is a good painting. Like, lots of them are bad.
Yeah.
Lots of them are amateurish, and we can say that without. But for some reason, I don't really know why. With movies, it's almost like, well, this is about Jesus, and I love the message, so we should support it. And it's weird if you don't support it, and I feel like we almost get tricked by it, of like, because like it may move us in some way, but like, is it because the movie is done in such a way with excellence and like crafted that it moves us, or is it just this is sort of invoking a different feeling I have apart from the movie, and I believe discipleship is powerful, and I wish we had more of that, and I'm pumped up now. But is that because of the movie, or just because of like your own personal beliefs?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it. Like, because it's movies like this are so, I guess, sentimental, that it touches people who care about these themes are going to be touched by it. Well, some people who care about these themes are going to be touched by it, because it has, for some reason it evokes in them their own thoughts on and their own feelings about discipleship or whatever the theme may be. And because it stirs you that way, you're given to be more, or you're given to be less critical of the way in which it was put together and the quality of the actual movie. And it's a strange thing, because it seems to kind of be the only area in which we just give a blatant pass, or some Christians, maybe a lot of Christians, give a pass for the actual medium and say, well, either that doesn't matter, it never occurred to them that it mattered, or it shouldn't matter because the message is so good that, again, if you put the shoe on the other foot and say, if this was just a totally left-wing agenda-driven movie, like, how would you feel about that? And it would be like, this is a bad movie.
Well, even less extreme. Like, I think if you just make the kid in The Forge a Mormon, or whatever, a Buddhist or something, like just another, and then you have the same thing about this story and this religious community, and they help, like, I feel like most Christians would be like, this isn't a good movie, this is just preaching, because a lot of the critiques you hear about Hollywood, we essentially make that movie with things like this. Like, it's just Hollywood just, they need to just tell good stories. It's not about pushing these agendas and messages, and then we go and like make movies that are like more agenda driven, message driven than like anything else found in Hollywood. But it's okay, because it sort of makes us feel good, because we like the message. Like, it's a good sermon. Like, we amen the sermon, and because we feel that way, maybe we are less likely to like even at all stop to think like, okay, but like, there's no 3-act tension. Like, the dialogue wasn't crisp. Like, there's like about 45 minutes in this movie where nothing happens beyond dialogue. Like, or the filmmakers, they're not, everything they communicate is through a character telling you, like, which is like the cardinal sin of storytelling. Like, you don't learn things about these characters by seeing them in action, like in their life.
Yeah.
You learn it because the camera's close in on their face and I'm just struggling with this because of this, and I need to overcome this. Like, it's just telling you, like, which is just not, regardless of it's Christian, like, it's just not good storytelling. But I feel like because what they're saying, because we almost go into like church mode of like, oh, we're used to people just preaching to us. And it's sort of the idea that I feel like art has a language. Like, I think the example I gave in the review was like a PowerPoint where like you have, sort of the classic of like, you have like an older person maybe that wants to, like, kids these days, they're visual, it's a visual generation. Like, so instead of just lecturing, I'm going to, or a professor or something, like, I'm going to have a PowerPoint of visuals. And then there's just like bullet point text, like, no pictures, just, and it's sort of,
and then they read from that text.
And then they just sort of, and it's like, well, like, I'm appealing to them because this generation is moved by, and that's kind of the idea of like, what I feel like these sort of films are doing. It's like, hey, people are moved by films, like, films are powerful, art's powerful, but it never embraces like the actual like language of film. Like, in the same way that like just picking up instruments and like randomly hitting notes isn't going to appeal to people because, hey, people love music. It's like there's a language to music. There's harmonies, there's notes that don't go together and notes that do go together. There's chords, like, there's structures, like, there's things about music that you also have to understand. Like, it's not just, as long as I got a guitar, like the kids like going to rock and roll concerts, like, so I'm just going to hit open strings on my guitar and appeal to them. Like, no, there has to be a sense that you understand how this art form works. And I feel like with movies like The Forge, to me, it's sort of taking, hey, people like going to the movie theater, people like movies are shaping us, so we need to counterbalance that. But it's not actually grasping any of the things that appeal to people through movies. Like, it doesn't treat it as a movie, it treats it as like it's a mere vehicle.
And I think movies like this really showcase that, and I think it's because I think partly movies can be such a very technical art form because, like, you have to get the lights right, there's camera, there's so many elements to making a movie that it can like present as a movie when in fact it really isn't a movie. And I think it then gives the choir, which is the church that goes and pays for this movie, the false sense that this movie is doing what all the other movies are doing in Hollywood, and it is a counterbalance, when in fact all it's doing is just affirming what the choir already feels, and nobody outside the choir is going to go and see the movies. But everyone in the choir is so excited because this is going to like impact people outside the choir.
Well, and I think the reason why it doesn't is like, if the movie, like, if the emotional beats and stuff, like the fact that makes it powerful, if that is just sort of reminding Christians of something outside of the movie, like, because Jesus as a person, as God, Son of God, because that fills you with emotion and you have that connection. Like, someone talking about Jesus in the scene is going to make you feel some of that, even though the scene itself isn't exciting, like, because it's invoking that. But like, if you're someone that doesn't have that like those frames of reference, having a character just talk to you for 6-minute dialogue scene, like, if that's not stirring your emotions about something else, then like,
that's really boring.
Then it's not stirring anything. Then it's not at all powerful. Like, I think because we're the choir, we can get tricked into thinking like, this is such a powerful, because we're bringing so much of other like background experiences in church and like our own Christian walk, like, to the table, and assuming that anyone else seeing this movie is going to have the same experience,
right?
Because I was so emotional because I remember when I was discipled by Pastor Joe, and I said, well, like, this 18-year-old kid that has never been to church, like, are they going to be moved by it the same way? No, like, unless the movie itself is powerful. And that's kind of the last thing I would just say for this is like, doesn't like, should Christians just like bite their tongue? Like, like there is this sort of sense that like, for someone like me to like give it a negative review is like, almost as like I'm a turncoat. Like, like, how dare you? Like, shouldn't we just like support? We need more Christian films. Like, there's
Judas.
Because even at the premiere, there was some sense of like, them telling us, and the movies they're going to be sharing the theater with it, like, definitely aren't elevating God, and like sort of this idea that I support this because
it's because it's the lone voice that's speaking.
Like a
for
ticket
truth.
for The Forge is like a ticket for building the kingdom of God.
And I think the counter to that is no, it isn't. It's not the only option that Christians have now, and it's not the only faith-based movie. Like there's lots of actually good faith-based movies now, and I think that is where, like, maybe back in the day when it was like, maybe the first faith-based film to go into theaters or whatever, it was a big deal, and like, hey, okay, you can get behind it, and like, hey, we need to see more of this. But this far into the game, it's like, yeah, but there's a lot of people doing this now, and we're getting faith-based movies like all the time.
Well, I think like, with the exception of maybe horror, like I don't think there's a genre, if you consider faith-based like a genre, like I don't think there's one that has more movies this year than faith-based. Like there's more faith-based films than there is comic book movies, even though like they're not as big budget or like they don't reach as many people maybe, but like as far as this quantity, like you're getting one of these every couple of weeks, like faith-based, like so I do feel like some of the marketing gimmick of just like if you really want people to the nation to turn to God, go buy a ticket for your all your friends, and like some of that I don't know, I get a little squeamish about the marketing aspect, but I do think like Christian, like bad movies are released all the time by secular movie makers, and Christians are humans, and Christians can make good movies, Christians can make bad movies.
Yeah.
But I feel like the reluctance to be honest about some of these, and like that you have to sort of like dance on eggshells to say, well, like I love the message in Jesus, but like it's kind of a bad movie. Like some of I think because we have done that for so long, like is why we still get movies like this. Like it's there's no incentive then if it's just like anything that has like all my favorite movies are the ones that perfectly align with my views, and if anything that comes out about Jesus, I got to support this. I got to say it's amazing. No critical thinking. Like I may be very critical about Hollywood films, but like for these films, turn that part off of the brain. Like I feel like you need to have honest conversations about art, because I feel like movies representing God and like Christ and stuff should be good. Like there's more at stake there than a bad comic book movie where you just say whatever, it's just a comic book movie. Like if it's a movie that's sort of gonna give people a picture of like the church and God, like we better make sure those are good. And you're not gonna get that by like being so squeamish about like saying maybe we could have done a little more thought put into like how we structure this movie, or like this long dialogue scene. Like maybe there's a better way to do it than just have a character literally sit in church services and have a pastor preach to him. Like maybe there's different ways to communicate the message. That's a bit more relatable to those outside of the church. But hey, let us know if I'm just way too grumpy and just need to love Jesus a bit more and support these types of movies. But I do think as this in general, the church just isn't very, I guess, educated, or like we haven't been pushed to think critically about art and films as much as just a movie that has a message I affirm good, message I don't affirm bad, and that's the end of the conversation. And I feel like as the church, we need to be a bit more engaged when it comes to film. But speaking of things that, hey, we can... films coming from maybe a faith-based, or at least a family-friendly, we would assume, perspective. Kind of an interesting, we don't need to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I just thought it's weird that apparently coming up, I don't know, there's no time frame for this, but you can perhaps enjoy some new streaming show content as you munch down on your Chick-fil-A crispy chicken sandwich. So sort of the rumors that have been going around, kind of
say more.
Hey, if you like,
if you like waffle fries and chicken sandwiches,
Chick-fil-A sauce, then hey, we got some shows for you. So there's been like rumblings, some rumors about this, and it seems like some of this data is leaked. So I'm guessing an announcement will come soon. But that Chick-fil-A, yes, not the same Chick-fil-A that makes the original
didn't invent
chicken
the
sandwich.
chicken, but just the chicken sandwich.
That good old Chick-fil-A closed on Sundays is apparently aggressively trying to break into the entertainment industry. So it seems like they're like getting ready to try and launch like their own streaming platform. Like I don't know what all that will look like. I don't envision it as like we're going to take on Netflix. Like, but at least have its own sort of ecosystem of shows and content that you can watch. And it seems like from the rumors and some of that it will be mostly like unscripted shows, like, more like real, reality TV type stuff of, I don't know if it's just like, here's, follow Jimmy as he, works a day at Chick-fil-A, or if it's like, something a bit broader than that. Although it seems like there's also plans to do more like scripted and like animated show, which they've done before. Like I know, like at least every year they release these if I remember right, like they've released several of these like animated. I mean, they're like 2 minutes long. That like they'll release like at Christmas time, or like, and it's just like on their website. Like, it's not like a streaming platform, and it's free, and it's just some like feel good story about I don't know, a kid and his cow or something. It's sort of these like, so they sort of like dipped their toes in some of that.
Well, I wonder too if this is at all driven, like this seems very like left field for like a restaurant chain to to be going into movies or entertainment, except that I know the former CEO has been heading up a lot of movie making magic here in Georgia at I think it's Trillis Studios, and so I know Kathy has been a big part of that. I'm not sure all their involvement, and so maybe it's less out of left field than
I think there is.
One would think.
We live in like Chick-fil-A country,
Yeah.
God's country, where you can get Chick-fil-A on every day except for Sunday. And again, like our church is where the Kathy family. Like I've taught Truett Kathy's kids Sunday school. Like so, like,
Yeah.
we see them all the time. And they have like Atlanta's become like a hub for movie making.
Yeah.
And like sort of the Chick-fil-A people have been very influential in that. So I don't think this is entirely just like a one day at a board meeting a couple weeks ago, someone's, hey, we already perfected the chicken sandwich. Like, can't do anything else there. Like, why don't we start making animated streaming shows? Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure this has been something that's been in the works for a while. The question is just why?
Yeah.
And do we need that? Do we need some Chick-fil-A content? So what do you like? Why?
Yeah.
Like, because it seems like even if there's been sort of in the works for a while, it just seems like a weird thing to like.
It does. I don't really have a good answer for you other than I think maybe it's still some of the Daily Wire type thing with what was their streaming Bent Key, yeah. So I think with all of the sort of outrage at Disney and Disney Plus and just many conservative families feeling sort of left out of entertainment options, that maybe this is, I don't know, this is pure speculation, but maybe this is trying to bridge some of that gap, like trying to find wholesome entertainment that families can feel safe around. And it's like we can just turn on the Chick-fil-A streaming app and, watch this while we make your chicken sandwich. I don't know. Like, so my guess would be it's maybe sort of trying to find its place within that entertainment gap of like, not just, a bunch of bratty kids or animated shows or just bad stuff. Make something that's maybe more wholesome and safe for the whole family kind of approach.
If I was a betting man, like my guess would be like this isn't necessarily going to be, like a $12 a month thing, and there's just like all the, cancel Disney Plus because now you can get Chick-fil-A Plus or whatever. Like, like I envision this more as like it's just sort of a niche thing that they do on the side, and they have some shows. Like maybe it's even free or it's really cheap.
Yeah, that would make sense.
They have some entertainment, and it's just sort of their way, like almost like a more missional. I mean, it might not be that. It might be, here's our premium. Pay $20 a month, and you can, you can get, the like a sitcom based in the Chick-fil-A headquarters or something like. Who knows what they could do with it? But I do think there is, some sense of hey, there's just a lot of junk out there. Could we be a small part in? Because they're doing that in other ways. Like Chick-fil-A has tons of different projects outside of outside of making chicken. Like they're involved in sports heavily, and like that maybe this is just like, hey, why don't we also kind of spread some goodness in this area? And I think if nothing else, it does just show that like people recognize the influence of like entertainment and media. Like this is what is really influencing us and like our culture. And there's power in stories, and like even like unlikely people can recognize that and be like, hey, if we want to make a difference, like there's lots of ways to make a difference outside of entertainment, but like this is still a big one. And like even if we're known for our chicken sandwiches, like we can also tell some wholesome stories. Hey, stay tuned if you're you've watched everything on your Hulu and Netflix and all those other things. Like just hold on for a bit, because pretty soon you will have Chick-fil-A Plus. Kind of the last thing I wanted us just to touch on is a little kind of more art, ickiness with art, although not faith-based, not even human art, and that is AI. So we've touched on AI before, and again, it's a bigger conversation. I'm sure we'll do deep dives on some of the AI stuff in future episodes. But there was a story that's kind of jumped out to me that I think probably a lot of people wouldn't have recognized unless they're just like really plugged in and like trying to follow this sort of stuff. And this is a kind of a lawsuit, like a kind of a legal kerfuffle, tension between some artists and the kind of some specific kind of AI algorithms or whatever they call those, like models that they and so the people leading this are some big name artists. Like, I know the one that is maybe the main one spearheading this is someone that has like worked as a designer artist for like some of the Marvel movies, and I think it was like the designer for like the original design of the Doctor Strange character for Marvel. And so it's, again, not necessarily people that are like household names, but these are people that are like are working heavily in the Hollywood.
They have an artistic pedigree.
Yeah, like they're professional working artists, and they have their case is that these sort of AI algorithm things, I don't know what to call them, are that they're learning off of essentially plagiarized works. That it's feeding in all this artwork and not giving the artist credit, and then it's spitting out the AI creation that's different. But it seems clearly that in order to learn how to do that, it's just taking, it's kind of like the equivalent like with a book or something. Like, you can write you a fantasy book, but to do so, we got to take all these actual existing fantasy books by human authors and like plug them into the system.
Yeah.
And then it learns all of that. Like, kind of like, is that plagiarizing? If they're not getting paid for that. They're not getting credit for that. So they've been fighting this battle for a bit. And there was sort of the first kind of landmark, again, this is early stages for this, but a judge in the Northern District Court over in San Francisco, which is like the heart of a lot of the AI kind of boom stuff, has agreed to let the case kind of go forward to like sort of what they call like the discovery phase. So it's not like he's not making like a verdict on this, but essentially the artists are now have the permission to like go peek beneath the hood at some of these sort of AI systems and see like how did they learn how to do this? What is going on? Which like until now has been pretty like we sort of know it's pulling from stuff, but like we've never really, unless you work for them, like known exactly how they're doing that.
Yeah.
So this is sort of the first step where we can begin to learn a bit more about just sort of how those things work. And I guess like for me, it seems like it's the first rocks in a landslide. Like, again, maybe it won't be, we'll see, but like, there's definitely been tension and just unease about AI. And like, what does that mean for copyright? What does that mean for artists? What does that mean for creative people? Is it going to replace them? Like, just like ethically, like, is using AI image like an ethical, moral thing to do? If it's essential, or is it sort of like a roundabout, way to plagiarize stuff without having to give credit for? What are some of your thoughts for this? Like, the case and this in general, some of this messy discussion.
I feel like it'll likely work out to be when you're doing like commercial stuff, whether that's actual commercials or movies or big things like that. There will probably be some guardrails around AI. But I think if you're just looking for stuff online, like I think that genie's kind of out of the bottle at this point, because you can just find stuff online that's like, whatever. People who are already kind of hacking the system, if you will, and able to make works that look pretty much like, a copy of someone else. But I think in some of how I've seen this sort of argument play out is that, I mean, if this AI, if whatever given AI system, if it's learning how to do art, let's say, it's way more skilled at it than maybe you or I would be, but that's how like every artist learns how to do art, is by copying art that already exists. And you can look at artists and you can see their influences from past generation of artists. And so, but I think when new artists stand out is when they kind of taken what they've learned and they kind of make it new in some way, make it more original. Although you can look at it and see, okay, well, I can see, this person's influence and that person's influence, but they've done something with it that's their own. And I think for AI stuff, it's just really tricky to figure out, to parse that. Like at what point does it depart from being just an exact replica of someone else's art? I think those are pretty maybe fairly straightforward. Like, oh, you just copied the Mona Lisa. Like, you can't pawn that off as your own. But when you start sort of amalgamating sort of a version of whatever artwork you want to do, but sort of influenced by Picasso or influenced by Monet or whatever, then it kind of starts to become something of its own. And how do you say, well, you can't be influenced by that artist? Like, are whole artists off limits? Or like, so it's like every artist is influenced, because the argument can be like every artist who puts out artwork has some influence from other artists in that artwork. And it's like, they're not plagiarizing, but they're not like not being influenced.
And I think, cause I feel like we agree on a lot of this stuff, but I feel like I'm more negative towards it than you are. Like for the AI, I guess like the counter to that would, at least to me, is like that it's one thing to like, hey, I love rock and roll and like I love AC/DC and like I'm gonna start a band and I want it to pay homage, and like we're gonna have the same sort of guitar sound. We're gonna kind of write songs that sort of sound like something this is AC/DC would have kind of wrote, like where you're clearly like you're mimicking a lot of that, which to me, I think like the AI is more equivalent to like, okay, I'm gonna sit on my computer and I'm gonna take several AC/DC songs, put them in, and I kind of remix them and I take apart, like, because like an AI algorithm, or I always call it algorithm. I know it's not an algorithm, but like
it kind of is.
But it's more like, it's not dispassionately like observing art and like being inspired by it as much as it's like taking the actual thing, putting those into the system, and like those data points are being moved around and pulled from to create something new. But it's like the actual stuff. Like it's not like it can't think, so it's just taking what exists and like forming it, remixing it in a way with a bunch of it, enough different ones to make it not like a total copy, which to me is closer to just straight up plagiarizing than it is like being inspired by. Like if it's the actual, hey, this story was fed into the system and it's pulling from this story, the actual like data that we have in the bank is different than like, hey, I loved Harry Potter, I'm going to write a story about a girl wizard that goes to a magical creature school. And it's like, well, you're it's the same thing, but you're inspired by it. Like, but you're not just like taking chunks of Harry Potter and like putting it into like in totally like the actual. So I don't know. And kind of the question again.
But so I think in those instances, like there are like plagiarism. So it's like if obviously if the AI spits out a story that's legitimately plagiarized, like that's easy to, hey, that was plagiarized because you had the exact same dialogue as page whatever on Sorcerer's Stone. So I think in plagiarism, it's very like pretty cut and dry, like in as far as writing goes. But I think where it's less cut and dry is in the more visual field, because like you could have the AI spit out a story, and if it's like you can check to see. I mean, like I know professors can put your term paper in and be like, yeah, okay, it's like 90% plagiarized because the stuff is already out there. And if you're like word for word plagiarizing an existing article or story, like you can check that, like that's verifiable. And I think,
but it's harder because I know now, because like my wife's a teacher, because you can put in like, hey, write this in the tone of a, and it will pull from enough. Like if it was one thing, if it's like, hey, this is this book and it's just, but if it's pulling from a bunch of books and it's sort of, and then it is smart enough to like change the language and the tone, like essentially paraphrase to the point that like you can't necessarily just like copy and paste it into Google and be like when I used to teach online classes, I could do that and be like, oh, yeah, this article, you just took this paragraph. Where now you can't. Like, it's different enough
Right. Which I think, okay, so like having, we don't want to get too bogged down in the weeds, but I think having AI like write your papers for you, I think is a different issue than like having AI come up with original artwork that you're going to now use and not pay somebody else to do. Like, well, we were going to hire a graphic designer for this project, but we just put it into AI. I think that's different than, hey, your kid is in school and they're just like using.
I feel like it's different, but it's the same. Both are shortcuts. Like both
sure
are using this tool in a way that is taken from someone else's work and passing it off as your own to save yourself, to make it more efficient. Like,
yeah,
it's illegal to plagiarize. Like, even in school, there's more grace in that. But you can't just, and you're not selling it, so it's a little different than you would be. But again, and we probably will spend like a whole episode on AI because I think there's so many implications. But at least for this, it just shows. I don't know. I'm always, maybe I drag my feet too much. Like, I think there are tons of uses for AI that are good. Things like this just reveal to me that, like, but there still is a lot we don't know.
Oh, for sure.
And especially as Christians, I don't think we should be too like jump both feet in. Like, this is a great tool. We can use it now in sermon prep, or we can use it for this, and we can, we don't need to have support artists. We can just have the AI thing generate all of our, visuals for whatever we're doing, and like. I think there still is some like morality, ethical issues that haven't been had.
I think there's lots to iron out, and I think it will get ironed out. It's going to be a bumpy road.
Yeah, and I don't think it's going anywhere. Like, I don't think. Yeah. I think almost like pirating music or something, like it's just going to become something that we live with, and just no one talks about the ethical stuff of it. Like it's just sort of going to be. We know it's kind of bad, but it's efficient and it's quick, and everyone does it, and I feel like that is where it's going. But that being said, I don't think that doesn't mean we should just let anything go. Like, I'm glad that there is people pushing back.
Oh, for sure.
Hey, artists, like, we don't want artists to go away, and because we need them to make original stuff, or else the AI is just pulling from stuff that exists. Like, in order to have like new styles and stuff, you need humans doing that to feed the model, or else it's just for the rest of our lives we just sort of have like remixes of what's already come before. But again, tons of stuff. I just think as Christians, hey, use the tool maybe at times, but there is some ethical stuff that I think, especially Christians above all people, like should at least have those conversations and think, and not sort of be the more worldly of like, well, as long as it's quick and efficient, like then our church does that. But hey, let us know if you guys are more friendly towards some of the AA stuff. But speaking of other things that you may be friendly or not friendly towards, depending on your own preferences, are movies in the movie theater, which brings us to our next segment. We have Out Now and Coming Soon. So as far as movies out now, again, like we already talked about, we don't need to get into The Forge. That's out now. Again, I have no problem with people liking this movie, and I don't care if anyone disagrees with my opinion. Like, we all have our own opinions, and I do think there will be people that like it. I just don't understand what they're.
Don't know why.
Yeah, I just don't understand what you guys are looking for. No, I do think it is going to come down to that. Like, are you affirming the message or are you evaluating the art?
Yeah.
Hey, if you just want to go affirm the message, then I think you can enjoy this if you go in with that expectation of like, this is a church service. I don't need just to do what films do. I need to just do what church does. And if you go with that mindset, I think there is some powerful or good messages in the film. And other movies, my Penguin friend, Alien Romulus are still out there. So if you guys haven't seen them yet, go check out my reviews on our channel for that before you do that. As far as Coming Soon, this is like the first week in a while that there's just really nothing. Like, I mean, there's actually a bunch of movies, but none of there's no big movie. Like, there's a couple horror movies, like a Blumhouse horror one about sort of AI. It seems like like if Alexa, ruined our life is sort of the premise of this movie, Afraid. And I feel like they could actually be interesting like themes and stuff, but probably very on the nose themes, but about AI and our relationship. And I just don't think I'll be able to see this one. And there's actually a faith-based film. See, we get these all the time. You Gotta Believe, which is like a sports sort of baseball movie, is Luke Wilson in it. I think it looks fine. I don't know how wide release. There's no showings listed where I live. I probably won't. I mean, there might be on Friday when they kind of figure out what else what theaters are free.
Yeah.
But hey, so there is some movies if you've already seen The Forge and you want another faith-based film, but this time about baseball. Then it actually, hey, it looks kind of cute, and I love baseball. But speaking of things that I like, the final segment of this episode, we have things we like that you should like too. So this is my week to share, and probably many of you are expecting me to just talk about metal. But if you have tuned in the last couple of weeks, I've sort of lost some of my confidence to speak about that. I feel like I'm still doing some soul searching with my mistake to mistake the country of origin of one of my favorite European power metal bands. So for at least one more week, I'm going to mull on that and come back with some good stuff in a couple of weeks. So instead of that, I thought I would just share a book series that I actually just finished yesterday. I've been listening to the audiobooks of these books starting in like January, so it's taken me all year to this point. And that is The Expanse by author James A. Corey, which is actually a pseudonym for two different authors that write these books together. And they're really good. Like I know some people are probably familiar with it. Amazon, or I think Sci-Fi, and then it moved to Amazon, made like a TV show, a 6-season show that was pretty popular, and it kind of had like a cult following of this. But these are like sci-fi books, but more like into the science aspect, like rather than just, less of like the Star Wars, like pew pew, spaceship flying, like dog, kind of less of like the more like fantastical stuff and more like kind of the harder science and like, just interesting stuff about the world building. And they're just really good. Like all 9 books are good. Like I'm almost sad to be done because I've been like so immersed in this world, like interesting characters. The authors, I'm presuming, aren't Christian. I think they actually got their start. They were like the assistants of George R.R. Martin, who wrote the Game of Thrones books. They were like his like personal assistant, and then they wrote these books together, and they're super popular. And just a lot of the stuff they do, like again, they're not necessarily Christians, but like they explore. Like, there's like Christian characters and like other religious characters, and like very like almost surprisingly like spiritual conversations, and like they really do just explore like, hey, how would humanity deal with these aliens and different things, and like whether that's people of faith or atheists or whatever it is. And so they're just really good. I will say as a caveat, heavy profanity, like quite heavy profanity. So more than I usually have in the books I read. So if that is something that I don't want any profanity, these books are not for you. But if you can maybe stomach some of that profanity, they're just really well done. Have you? I think you maybe watched some of the.
Yeah, I am familiar a little bit. I feel like I watched a season or 2 of the show, and I it took a while to get into, but I really liked it. I think it's it is the hard sci-fi. So it really is, I think, and it's maybe more near future than like, there's some sci-fi that's like in a galaxy far, far away. This is more like, hey, in the next 100, 200 years, if we become a spacefaring people like Elon Musk wants us to be, what are some of those challenges? Like if you colonize Mars or if you live in the asteroid belt or all that. So I'm a total nerd for this kind of stuff, but I haven't read the books.
They have like bullets, and it's not like laser guns or laser.
Right.
It's like still bullets and like nukes, and but yeah, just interesting. Like, hey, if you grew up without gravity, what would that do to your body? Like without, so they're all kind of longer, and like there's interesting stuff that. Again, I love sci-fi, and I've enjoyed these books. So hey, if you need a new sci-fi series, this one will last you for quite some time because there's a lot of these books. But that has maybe lasted as long as it needs to. Is this week is this podcast again? Always a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. And just for culture, we're glad that you guys join us each week as we just have these conversations, whether we have answers or just hey asking good questions about culture. How do we do this? So we encourage you guys if you watching us on YouTube or listening, send us comments, comment below. Let's have a conversation about this. But we hope we will see us next week, every Thursday, for more conversations on faith and pop culture.